I know you're dying here, but we got to still finish up these thinkers. So the next one is Voltaire. His name is actually, this Voltaire is a pen name, nom de plume. That means pen name. His name was Marie Francois Arouet, I think. He is considered the greatest of the Enlightenment thinkers. The French called their thinkers, their Enlightenment thinkers, philosophe, like philosopher. And so that's what they called them at the time. He is all about free speech. So you want to write down um, for Voltaire, his main idea is free speech, freedom of religion, and free speech. These are both be implemented in the Bill of Rights. And so those are important. He believed in freedom of religion and free speech. And so he was constantly getting arrested. He would criticize the King of France. You remember, it's an absolute monarch. He would constantly be put in prison. That's one of the reasons he wrote under a pen name. And so, he was big on freedom of speech. So anytime you see Voltaire, that's pretty easy, freedom of speech. Deism as a new idea in religion for the Enlightenment. I don't think you really have a box for this, but deism was the idea rather than God's watching over you in everything you do, which they had believed since the Middle Ages. The Enlightenment thinkers were deists, and they believed in the idea that God just created the universe and set it in motion, and it ran without his interference. He wasn't overseeing things. And that's where the idea of natural law and natural rights and those things come from, is that, really God just was like a clockmaker and he set it in motion and started the clock. And so that was the interesting thing of religion. All right, next guy that you have to know is Montesquieu. He's the Baron of Montesquieu. He has another name, I can't remember it. Again, he's a French philosopher, so a philosophe. He wrote a book, and you might want to write this down if it's not already in there, called The Spirit of the Laws. I forgot Voltaire wrote Candide. It's a famous book too. And his big thing, and I'm just going to skip right to it, is the idea of separation of powers. He believed in the separation of powers, that the power of the government should be divided into three branches: a legislative branch, a judicial branch, and executive branch. So separation of powers into three branches: judicial, which is your court system; legislative, which is parliament, for us it's Congress; and executive. At that time it would have been the king, so they were okay with kings. Today it would be the president, or in a parliamentary system it would be a prime minister. And they also believed in checks and balances. He didn't think it was good for any one king to be too powerful, or any one person to be too powerful, so that every branch of government had a check on another branch, so it didn't become too powerful. This was coming from England, the idea that the parliament could put limits on the king. The king couldn't tax without parliament and things like that. So his ideas were influenced by what we've already seen, with Petition of Right and English Bill of Rights and things like that. Okay, so big things for Montesquieu, main ideas for Montesquieu: separation of powers, separate the government into three branches: judicial, legislative, and executive, and then checks and balance, so none of them got too powerful. That is, straight up civic stuff. That our whole government is based on this idea of Montesquieu. So you can see why we have to learn about it. All right, very last one is Jean-Jacques Rousseau. He was writing things at the time of the American Revolution. He lived right up, just before the American Revolution. He lived right up until the American Revolution. He died not too long after it began. And he wrote a book called The Social Contract. So it's influenced by Hobbes, who also, he comes up with the idea of social contract, and Locke, who writes about social contract. And again, his ideas is that there's an agreement between the government and the people, and it was made somewhere in history. We don't even know, because there's a question: where did governments come from in the first place? And so they're trying to answer that. But his big thing is that if the ruler violates the contract, then the people can overthrow them and choose a new ruler. Again, this is something that's really going to influence the American Revolution, right? So if the ruler quits protecting people, then they can overthrow them. That's the big idea from Jean-Jacques Rousseau. So his main idea, he wrote The Social Contract, and the idea that, majority rules and the social contract, if it's violated, people can overthrow their government. Very similar to Locke. Okay. Last thing is economic theory. I don't want to get too deep into this, but you got to know who Adam Smith is. Adam Smith is very famous. This is what capitalism is based on. So our system of economics for the most part. And he used a concept, and you want to write it down, laissez-faire. And laissez-faire in French is let it be. Smith was not French, by the way. All right. His idea that government should not interfere with the economy. It should all be just based on supply and demand. In older times, the king had a lot of control over what could be sold, and what could be bought, and the taxes that had to pay. And Adam Smith's idea was laissez-faire, let it be, government stays out of the economy. So that's his main idea. Laissez-faire and government stays out of the economy. He's the only economic theorist we're going to talk about this unit. So if it talks about the economy, Adam Smith is the answer. Okay, very last one. You're almost done. You can do this. All right, Mary Wollstonecraft, the only woman of the group. So if it says she, it has to be Mary Wollstonecraft. She was part of these Enlightenment thinkers. They would meet in what they called the salons of Europe. We think of it as a hair salon. You go get your hair done and you gossip. Well, they just did the gossipy part. And Mozart might be playing over in the corner, or some other musician, and they had drinks and they just talked about, philosophy and things like that. That's what I imagine anyway. So Mary Wollstonecraft was involved with this. She's actually famous. Her daughter, Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley, wrote Frankenstein, the novel Frankenstein. So, you're probably familiar with that work. You probably know about Frankenstein. So anyway, Mary Wollstonecraft was a writer, and she believed, they're all here talking about natural rights and all these things, rights that you should have and all this. And so Mary Wollstonecraft is like, hey, what about the women? All right, we should have natural rights too. We have the ability to reason, and we should have equal rights. This is what you're all talking about. And she wrote a book called The Vindication of the Rights of Women. And so in this, 1700s, she's arguing that women should have equal rights. And they pretty much went, nah, we're good. Just white men. So anyway, so as you can see, it took a long time for women to get rights, and people of other nationalities and descents and African Americans, like, it took a long time to get their rights. So this movement in Europe was really about rights of white men. So Enlightenment, it sounds great, and natural rights and everything, but they weren't applying it to everyone. All right, and so Mary Wollstonecraft really is the beginning of the movement for women's rights, but it doesn't really go very far. So she's an easy one. So last thing, I guess, is how did the Enlightenment affect us? Well, the Declaration of Independence is full of Locke's idea. Our Constitution is an example of a social contract. From Montesquieu, in our government, we have separation of powers, 3 branches of government, and checks and balances. And from Rousseau, the idea that government is created from the consent of the people. Our American Revolution, we overthrew the government. It wasn't protecting the rights of the people. And we created a new government with a contract. And that was very much Rousseau. So you can kind of see how they had a lot of influence. And I think we'll just quit right there. So hopefully you filled that out. Go ahead and do the Nearpod quiz. It's just you're matching up the people and practicing with the people, and then you will be done. So I will see you on Monday.